Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we explore the connection between mental health and faith. I'm Dr. Matthew Stanford, neuroscientist, author, and mental health advocate.
And I'm Dr. Madeline Stiers, therapist and trauma researcher. We're so glad you're joining us today. Each week, we have authentic conversations about personal stories, we share professional insights, and explore the meaningful ways faith can influence mental well-being.
Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's conversation.
Hello, and welcome back to this episode of Madness and Grace podcast. My name is Dr. Madeline Stiers.
And I'm Dr. Matthew Stanford.
And today we are going to be talking about perfectionism and what that is, how to let go of perfectionism, how it can fuel anxiety and shame, exhaustion, what striving towards excellence is versus perfectionism, right. And how Grace invites us to work towards freedom from perfectionist-driven lives and these tendencies. So as we jump in today, I want to kind of come out the gate saying perfectionism is not a mental illness.
Absolutely not.
It is not a mental illness. Perfectionism is a personality trait. It can be something that you're born with, your temperament. It can be developed by the environment in which you were raised or are currently living. Perfectionism is oftentimes taking your worth and attributing it to your accomplishments, setting these unrealistic, sometimes expectation and standards that you reach these accomplishments and goals. People oftentimes fail to recognize their accomplishments and just continuously move on to the next. They don't pause and celebrate any changes. Perfectionism can look like little small things in your day-to-day life. Having everything be set up perfectly, your house is immaculate, but it can also be these larger goals that you strive towards and are working towards. When we talk about perfectionism, I think people oftentimes think about, they might say, I'm a perfectionist. Like I have to have straight A's in school, or my work has to be, top-notch completed before the deadline's done. So they think of it in how it affects them. And the perfectionism that they put on themselves. In reality, we also see perfectionism and how it can be pushed on to someone else. So if you're experiencing perfectionist traits that are not managed, that can spill out into your relationships and can be not only damaging for your own mental health, but for your relational health, and how other people are interacting with you. The expectations that you're putting on them might be unrealistic or unattainable, or something that they really just don't want to do. So perfectionism, if managed, can get people extremely far in life, and if left unmanaged, can be really damaging to your life and your relationships.
Yeah, I would say that perfectionism is not a strength. People like to say that. And, we have adages like, practice makes perfect kind of a thing. And as you mentioned, there's a very big difference between perfectionism and kind of a high drive for excellence. Because, a drive for excellence and working on something and making sure it's accurate and things like that can be, very beneficial to an individual. Perfectionism crosses a line. Perfectionism says my value is associated with my output or my performance, and that, and then there's an underlying fear of making a mistake or errors that are going to lead to rejection or failure. And the reality is when as people in the mental health field, when we encounter people that perfectionism is a huge part of their life, they never are able to make anything perfect. And so, in fact, it has led to just a disaster in their life. They are so afraid of rejection. They're never able to complete tasks. They set up unrealistic boundaries and thresholds and goals for themselves that they can never meet or anyone else can ever meet.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and from an outsider looking in, you think, well, you have completed this. These tasks are done.
Yeah.
But in their mind, they're not done.
No, because they never can be done. because they
And it
never
doesn't
can be
have to be,
perfect.
it's
So,
not,
right,
like I said, it's not these large, grandiose goals like becoming an astronaut sort of thing. It
right.
is these small goals throughout the day that put burden and stress on them
Right.
mentally, physically. And while their house may look, I'm just using the house because it's an easy one, may look extremely like immaculate to us, this is out of place. And I don't mean from an OCD perspective, but like it's not, they've not, it's not where it
They
needs to
can
be. It is
always
not
find a mistake.
perfect. There's something wrong
Always.
with
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And we're going, what is happening? And really what that does, this chronic push for perfect, is removes the ability to rest. And when you don't rest mentally or physically, what happens? When we know rest is imperative to our
Fall
health.
apart. It
Yeah.
also, it completely removes their ability to assess the performance or actions of others.
Right.
Because they are incapable of coming up with kind of a reasonable set of criteria for anything. And that becomes a real problem when you're talking about a parent. A parent, who's raising children. Uh, and then, you don't want to fall into some kind of cliche-ish kind of, but this, the kind of the stage mother kind of a thing that it's not always the mother, obviously, going to be the sports father.
Where's and yes.
Absolute perfection is required of a child that couldn't do anything perfect because they're just not at that age yet, And so first off, I think the real question is we have to just understand that there is no perfect. I mean, if you're going to set your house up and you're going to have a tea party for somebody, I promise you that anybody could come through your house and they could find some little thing after you've worked for 10 hours to make it just perfect that isn't exactly perfect. But for the person with maladaptive perfectionism, that's destructive to them personally. That is shaming and destroys them because of that. And so I think that we have to separate the idea, like we said, of kind of striving for excellence. And there's a lot of age appropriate aspects to this. There's a lot of situational aspects to this. I mean, what is excellence in the context that you have, that you're in? And so, maybe a person with unlimited resources, financial resources or whatever they might be able to do something somewhat better than you, but you can do it at a certain level that's perfectly acceptable. And then others look at it and actually they think that's really wonderful what you've done. And so I think we have to kind of dial it back. I would say that there's a lot of drive for perfectionism. Sadly, perfectionism, we see it most significantly in adolescent females at this time. And a lot of that's social media driven. The perfectionism a lot of times today goes hand in hand with kind of this comparison culture type of thing that we see. So I look online and I see Maddie's Instagram and she has her house set up in a certain way. And it's just so these pictures are beautiful and everything looks wonderful. And it looks like it just came out of a magazine. And then I look at my own house and I go, oh, what a dump. I got to do better. And so now it has to be just, perfect, in a certain way. And so, one of the things that we forget, although when people are surveyed, they know it, that, Maddie took 40 pictures of her coffee table before she found one that she could post where everything was just exactly the way it should be. I'm just making all this
Don't
up, by the way.
see the closet that,
Exactly.
Monica's closet on Friends. Right?
Everything just outside of the frame of the picture is a
Yeah.
disaster. So, I think that, there's a lot of that as well. The problem, again, where, from a mental health perspective, perfectionism can lead to some pretty significant issues.
We're seeing that in adolescence. I mean, I think,
absolutely.
like you mentioned, adolescents are emerging adults, right? They are trying to find their place in the world. They are trying to find their place in their community and really establish an understanding of where they derive their worth from. Where does their worth come from? Is it their friend group? Is it God? Is it their parents? Is it their work? And is it their social media presence? And unfortunately, we lean pretty heavy on that nowadays. But yeah, absolutely. If you don't have a system, if these adolescents don't have a system around them that really validates unconditional love in the family and our Savior's unconditional love, they're going to put emphasis and importance on these things that are not important in the grand scheme of life, right? They're not the most important thing, and it's all to find worth and value. It's this fear of failure, because then I will be unworthy and unloved, and no one will care, and we know that to not be true. And as a child, helping them develop that understanding is really imperative. And we just have such a culture that, like you're saying, it's not, and not just social media, but we want people to do more and be more. Right. And that, just even if you're trying your hardest, trickles down into our kids. And so if you're a perfectionist, being mindful of that, because you can impose that on your children. And like you were saying, it leads to some significant mental health challenges, and long-term stress, chronic stress is not good for us in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I would say this. I mean, perfectionism, and again, we're not talking about being excellent. I think we should be excellent in what we do. I want to be an excellent leader of a nonprofit organization. When I write a book, I want it to be an excellent book. When we do things, they should be done excellently. That's just hold ourselves to a good standard, a reasonable standard of performance. I think for perfectionism, we're really talking about something that's typically maladaptive, and really you're either taught to be a perfectionist, or you take on that role, but both for the same reason. And that is, as you mentioned, Maddie, for value and worth. Yeah. So as academic performance is important. Doing well in school is important because there are significant benefits, financial, societal, whatever benefits from that, personal, and intelligence, things like that. So, I mean, there are benefits, but, training your child that if they make anything except 100 on a test at any level, whatever, and that your love is somehow connected with that, or your expectations for them as a person and as a child, as your child, your love is somehow connected with that you treat them well when they do it and poorly when they don't. That leads to a lot of pathology over time, because then, nothing is ever obtainable. And you have no value unless you're performing at a high level. And so what happens to the child that has a learning disability? What happens to the child that has other issues going on and they're not able to perform at the expectation of the parent? I've dealt with families that were just crushing their children with kind of unrealistic academic expectations, which would have been in line with perfectionism, and because they wanted to live vicariously somehow through their children. But then also, I think on the other side, if you're an adult and you've kind of adopted that, a lot of times there's a void in you emotionally. And the thought is, well, if I can perform at a high level within this area or whatever, a perfect level, then people will care for me, love me, show me affection, attention. So again, it's the same kind of core need, but you adopt it. And then also social media influences us in the sense, well, I want to appear like something I'm not so that people will show me value, and I have to do that. And so it can be very, very damaging. We're talking about anxiety, depression, eating disorders, a lot of things. And really it just gets back to us being happy in our own skin, comfortable in our own skin, caring for people for who they are, not for what they do. And when I say who they are, I don't mean because they're the mayor or they're the president or they're a famous celebrity. They're just a person made in the image of God, and you care for them because of that. And so you love your children because they're your children. You don't love your children because of how they do in the school. And again, I think a lot of times And I think this is the difficult thing for parents a lot of times is, there's a fine line sometimes between encouraging your children to do well and supporting that, and shaming or damaging your children because they're not performing at the level you want them to perform at.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it all comes, for the most part, comes from a place of love, and you want your child to be happy and you want the best for them. And the best for them is what you've decided in your head is the best for them. But is that ultimately the best for them? And it's a learning process. As children grow, they change their wants and desires, and, interests shift. And for a fully established adult, that might be hard to kind of pivot with. But it's important that you're having those conversations with your kids, and encourage good grades and engagement in extracurriculars. And if they are not interested in some of the things that you are, or they decide that they want to quit Spirit Squad 3 weeks in because they don't like it, it doesn't mean that they're a failure. It means that they have autonomy, and there's some self-realization and self-actualization happening there. They said, this is not something that I'm enjoying, and I don't want to spend my time because it doesn't make me happy, right? And listening and having those conversations, because if we're not having those conversations with not just our children, but people in our lives, and we're placing their worth in their output, not who they are and how they act, and wanting them to be happy and find joy, that leads to, like you said, shaming. And the act of us shaming others, especially if it's consistent, leads to, some of this chronic negative thinking, and can push people into really having these untruths about themselves, about their worth, and can just really spiral into some significant self-image issues, self-worth issues. And it's important that we are paying attention to how we're engaging with people, especially our kids.
So if you're out there and you're wondering, like, am I a perfectionist? I think I'll give you some thoughts on that. I think one thing that you might look for is that you actually have difficulty finishing tasks. I mean, one of the kind of double-edged swords of perfectionism is that you never can finish anything. And part of that is because it's kind of a two-edged thing. You want it to be perfect, so you never can attain to whatever that goal is that you think. Like, you just keep working on it and working on it and working on it, and you also are so desperately afraid that it's not going to be perfect that there's a weird kind of a procrastination that occurs where you don't want to actually finish it. And so it's a very odd. So what you find if you're a parent and you are kind of pushing perfectionistic things on your children, it actually works against you. It causes them to actually not get things finished and do worse. So if you are finding, just as a person, that you have difficulty finishing tasks, and a lot of times that's because you have the inability to allow yourself to say, this is at a point that it's okay to turn in or okay to be finished. Well, that's one sign of this, and also the procrastination due to fears of imperfection. Those are signs. Being overly harshly critical of yourself, where people tell you, like, well, that was a fantastic dinner party you had. Oh, it was just atrocious, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, they just can't understand why you would be so, self-critical or demeaning of yourself after they enjoyed the situation. A lot of all or none thinking, the idea that it was either perfect or it was the worst thing that ever happened. And people start to call you on that, and they don't seem to understand why you are saying those kind of things. Just chronically dissatisfied with the results of anything, even when people praise you for what occurred. And those are all signs of perfectionism. And I think what you have to ask yourself, if you're the parent, is, are you feeling that way towards your child? Your child isn't going to be able to tell you, hey, Dad, I think that's a little bit of an unrealistic expectation of me as a 6-year-old pitching. I don't think that, but are you just constantly dissatisfied with their performance? Do you do you find that you drive them into like even a worse performance because of your overbearing approach to that? Are your expectations of them realistic for someone of their age and their skill set? You know, my son is a high school basketball coach. And, you know, he'll be the first one to tell you that parents are the worst at evaluating the skill levels of their children. They all think that all of their children are going to play in the NBA, even though when they go out on the court in front of hundreds of people to play, there isn't a person in that gym that thinks that kid's going to the NBA. But their parents do. And so, you know, I think you have to ask yourself realistic questions when it comes to this. And I think you have to get outside information. So, Manny, what are some things that what would happen in the therapeutic environment if someone came in and they were showing kind of over this kind of unrealistic perfectionistic tendencies?
Yeah, I think I think the first thing that I think therapists pick up on this pretty quickly, but the first thing that we notice is this constant sense of failure, you know. So while perfectionism, like you said, it's kind of a twofold. It's catch-22. You're working away from you're working away from failure. You're constantly trying to not be a failure, and in that effort you ultimately fail at these unrealistic goals.
Right.
Yeah. And so we have clients come in that just are they're I'm a failure, I can't do anything right, and it's not. We hear that in some senses with trauma when people are telling them that, right? There's this invalidation, but it looks different with perfectionism because they may be successful in life in the way that, you know, kind of a standard level of success, but they don't feel it. And really what we see oftentimes is extreme challenges in relationship. Whether that's relationships with their children, a romantic partner, or their family of origin, and not necessarily I'm talking about an adult client right now. They're not having those expectations pushed on them by family necessarily right now, maybe when they were children. But really it plays out in their relationships because they're working towards perfectionism. Striving to be this picture of perfect. And so their expectations of others is that it
spills out onto others. Right.
And their expectation is that you as the partner or you as the child reach their expectation of perfect, not your own expectation of perfect. And you will see challenges, and they don't necessarily recognize this, but it's children saying, I just kind of putting their foot down or throwing a tantrum. I don't want to do that. I'm not willing to do that. You don't love me. And they're like, oh my gosh, I love you so much. Like, what do you mean I don't love you? Or romantic partners saying, yeah, do you love me? I'm very confused because you say this, but then you tell me that I'm doing everything wrong. And it feels like you want me to change. And
right. You want me to be someone I'm not.
You want me to be someone I'm not. You're trying to change who I am.
Right.
And it's really distressing for them because these are not bad people. They're not people who wake up and say, you know what, everyone needs to be exactly like me. And if they're not like me, they are just not it. They're not doing it well. No, they're people who have fallen into this routine, this idea, this way of thinking that's oftentimes, you know, just based on how they were raised and their personality trait, and really sadly working to find value and worth. And so what we will often do is talk about internal locus of control versus external locus of control. You know, where do they find the drive to get things done? What are their pleasures? Where do they find joy? And where's their value and worth placed? What does that look like? And so helping them identify all of these things that you and I have just kind of outlined, because they may not recognize this is what's going on. If you recognized it, likely you're going to work towards changing that. If you recognize that you have a behavioral tendency that is harmful to you and your relationships, we typically work to change that. So clients who show up that are aware of what's going on, it's easier than clients who show up that are unaware of how their tendencies are impacting their lives. And so really working to address it and then work towards change and in a very standard CBT way, and helping them understand their negative core beliefs, or what I call like an
Right.
untruth, and how we can work to. And CBT is not just be happy and think happy about everything and everything's going to be great. No, it's identifying untruths, working to replace that thought of yourself, like I'm not worthy unless I'm perfect, with a more realistic expectation of I have worth and I will be really successful in some things and I will fail in others, helping them identify rest. And if they're a person of faith, which oftentimes our clients here are, helping them understand how their identity and self-worth are interconnected with God and their religious identity, and really kind of diving into that a little bit more, because as a Christian, we know our worth is in God, and our identity in Him can really give us some strength and purpose in life, and shift away from the day-to-day idea of perfect and what offers value in life.
No, I think you make a really good point there, and that, when if you're an individual and you find yourself to be perfectionistic, uh, you might say, well, that's just a strength I have because I want to do everything right. But you find very quickly that person all their relationships are being damaged as a result, because you never can just hold yourself to these ridiculous standards. You hold everyone. And then if you're a parent and you're doing that to your child, the reality is it's your problem that you're
Right.
putting on them. It's not that they aren't performing where they should perform. Even if they're performing poorly,
Sure.
you're putting your own personal issue onto them. And so that's the important aspect of kind of changing that perfectionism, is recognizing it's not other people's problem. I've had people tell me, well, everything would be fine if other people would just live up to my standards because my standards are perfect. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad
Yeah.
I met you, and so the thing is that, and their life is a mess as a result of that. And so I think that, we have to recognize that it's our own personal problem. And you also mentioned faith, and I see a perfectionism a lot of times within faith contexts where people have this sense that God demands absolute perfection from them for Him to love them. And there are scriptures that say, "Be perfect as I am perfect," and those absolutely do mean for you to be perfect and sinless. But that's the whole point of a savior, and that's the whole point of an indwelling Holy Spirit that transforms you in a spiritual context and makes you perfect on the inside as you then are progressively being changed on the outside. That God isn't asking for you to act perfect. He isn't asking for you to make yourself perfect. He sent His Son for that. And so I think that it's just a misunderstanding. Now, a lot of times within faith communities, you have kind of a more of a works-based approach to your faith, in that, I do a lot of things and those things bring holiness into my life, and that shows other people that I'm a follower. And I'm not saying that it's wrong for you to pursue holiness and behave in certain ways. It's wrong for you to compare one person to the other and say, well, this guy has a great faith because of his actions, and this guy's faith isn't great, because we all start at different points, and we all, but kind of working towards perfection from a faith perspective always leads to a destruction of a person's faith, because you're never able to meet the expectations.
Yeah.
You're always going to come across somebody that's holier than you, that does it better than you. And then in that context, it just guts your faith. Well, I'm just a horrible Christian, so why even try? This guy prays 10 times a day. I pray once a day. What good am I?
Well, I think another somewhat ironic thing to perfectionism and Christianity is rest, because when we see perfectionists in the wild, in real life, they don't rest. There's often the chronic stress. It prevents them from being able to rest.
Burnout,
and actually,
workaholic.
we see all of this negative impacts of relationship, their physical health, their mental health, their spiritual health, and kind of the ways that you were just identifying it. But what did God do on the seventh day?
Yeah.
He's
There is
resting.
no rest for the perfectionist. There's always a
And
mistake
so,
to fix, you know. So,
and then if you sit down and I'm going to take a break today. This is my rest. I'm resting today. Are you resting correctly? What's the correct way to
right.
rest and relax? Are you doing it the right way? I mean, and these are some of the internal thoughts of like, okay, well now I'm not resting well because I'm stressing myself out about thinking about how I'm resting. And can I get up and do this X, Y, and Z thing, or is that not rest? Is that so? Now this idea of rest becomes the task that we're working towards perfectionism on. I mean, it's really this. It's not that they want to be perfect in a specific area. I want to be perfect at work, or I want to be the perfect spouse, or I need to be perfect in every
Everything.
aspect,
Yeah.
every task, every area of my life, that it becomes overwhelming and really just prevents them from being able to do anything effectively. I mean, they're going to end up, like we've said, they don't feel like they've managed to get the task done. Even if they do get the task done, it's imperfect in their mind, which leads to these spiraling thoughts, which leads to negative output on family members and loved ones. And chronic stress is bad on your physical health. I mean, it really is, like we
Well,
say, it's a holistic
it's an
thing.
irony. I mean, the perfectionist wants to do, whether they recognize it or not, they want to do everything perfectly so that they will have value and worth and affirmation from others. But they never can do anything perfectly, just because no one can do anything perfectly, but also because they set unrealistic thresholds and boundaries that have to be met, which can never be met. And then they drive everyone away because no one wants
Right.
to be around.
Yeah.
No one wants to be around a perfectionist
Because they're
because
made to feel imperfect,
they
and their
start
their
telling you
worth
what
and
you
love is
can't. Right,
only
exactly.
going to come
Yeah.
from their outputs there,
No
and
one
it's
wants to
not.
be around the perfectionist. I
No.
mean, I think about, these kind of funny kind of memes, little videos I come across of the, kind of the perfectionistic mom or dad that tries to plan the perfect vacation for the family. And then, the vacation turns into a disaster because any little error, any little wait, any little, and so it's like nobody wants to ever go on the vacation, even though there are these elaborate big vacations and all this, because they know how it's going to ultimately end, because this person can never be satisfied. And really that's the thing. They can never be satisfied because they're not really looking for, although again, they may not know this, awareness, like you said, is important. They're not really looking for perfect performance. They're looking for value and worth out of performance. And you're never going to get that. It's just
Yeah,
never
it's
going
not about
to,
it's not about actually
doing something
whatever
perfect.
task
Yeah.
is done perfectly. It's about my value and worth is placed in this, and
As a
it's
human being. Yeah. I
as
mean,
a human
yeah,
being. And
exactly.
so
Yeah,
if I don't do things, people won't love me and I will have no
exactly.
value. And that's, I mean, how scary, how sad. I mean, it really is such a sad place to be, because, and people may not recognize that they're going through it, because to the outside world, you seem like, if you're not interly connected with them, you seem like you've got it all together, and really they're really struggling to manage most
Perfectionists are
aspects of
always
life.
frustrated with everyone around them,
Yeah.
uh, because of their because they're feeling stress and they're feeling anxiety, and it's just like because of everybody else. It's not, I've got it all together. And I think we as a society, we really, in some sense, like you just said, we kind of affirm people that are perfectionistic, and we think that's a good thing. We kind of wish we would be like that, but we just don't
Yeah.
realize how negative of a mental health effect that has on people. And really what the point of it is not to do things well, although the person would say that. The point of it is really to find value and worth, because at some point in your life, or because of some experience you had, you were minimized because of your performance. And now you're desperately trying to, you're just that sad little child that's trying to please their dad, and you're trying to perform out on some sports field or in some arena at a level you'll never be able to do it, just so your dad will be happy and love you more. And so it's a sad thing. Although I have seen people that, I've seen them and I know, oh, that poor person is just, their life has
Struggling.
to be rough, and people are just affirming them left and right. And they don't really receive that affirmation well, because while you're saying to me, wow, that really was done well, that was the best I've ever seen, I'm going through all the mistakes I made.
Or they're on to the next thing that needs
Right,
to be
yeah.
done, this
Right.
next level of output. And that's why I said earlier, oftentimes perfectionists don't stop to celebrate because they don't see it as something done well. And so if they just ignore it and move on to the next thing, that one will also help produce more worth for them and love. And it's this never ending chase for love and value. And really, I think one of the takeaways today is just to recognize that you're, as a Christian, your identity and worth is in our Savior and God, and
you're accepted. You have value. You have worth.
and you're loved.
Right. You have to live out of that. It's not just a cognitive assent. It's you have to live out of that. And so when you're doing a task, you do it excellently, but not because you need to be valued or loved more, just because you're called to do things excellently. So Paul says, do all things excellent as unto the Lord. There you go. That's it. That's why you do it. You don't do it. And if you fall short of what your expectation was, you just do better next time.
Yeah.
That it didn't change your value and worth in any way. If you did it perfect, let's say that was possible, you aren't loved anymore. You're loved no more than you were loved before, because you're not loved for your performance. You're loved because you're a child of God, period. That's it. So, I mean, that's, I don't think we talk about that enough. I think a lot of times, even our faith is kind of reduced down to a set of performances. And boy, we are so quick to fall into that perfectionistic mode. So if you're out there and you're thinking, well, maybe I'm a perfectionist, well, just ask yourself, when was the last time you finished a task and you were satisfied? If never is the answer, well, then you're there, you're there. And, you got to really ask yourself also, well, why do I do this? If it's making me so miserable, whose attention, whose affirmation, whose value, what value am I trying to gain? Do I just feel like I don't, that might be something.
Your value and worth. Right. Where do you place that?
It might be something to talk to a counselor about, might be something to talk to your pastor about. But certainly look at the way you engage your children, because they're still young and there's no reason to build those patterns into them. So thanks for being with us today on Madness and Grace, and we hope to see you at one of our upcoming episodes.
Thanks for joining our conversation on this episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. If you found value in our discussion today, we'd love it if you'd subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please consider leaving us a rating and review. It helps others find these important conversations.
Sharing this podcast with friends and family members is also a wonderful way to extend hope to those who might be struggling with mental health concerns.
We'll be back next time with another candid conversation about madness and grace. See you then.